Just like RSPO has members from both sides. It's the producers, the environmentalists, the stakeholders are multiple. Same is the case in case of MSC. What about FSC? How is the standards upgradation done? Because you have been doing it for 2 decades. So is it that in your case also upgradation is done on a base, something similar to PNC on a regular basis? Is there a time charter for this?
Yeah, we set ourselves up with a very, very democratic, horribly democratic system with equal balance in voting, in weight in the organization between social, environmental and economic stakeholders. So the social sector, unions, indigenous peoples groups, workers, has just as much power as environmental groups and just as much power as the economic sector. And they're further split into economic north and economic south, so it's very democratic. And that means that when we talk about FSC, we're not talking about a green standard or a green label. It's actually a social standard, an economic standard, and an environmental standard. Right. And the social stuff is probably the thing that differentiates us most from our competitors in a way in the field, because we have this very strong support from social groups. And when we look at labor issues, we have very strong reference to ILO conventions and those things. And in our original principles and criteria, 3.5 of those original 10 principles are to do with social issues. So when we've come to reviewing our principles and criteria, we did the original principles and criteria were 94, 95. There was a small revision in, I think, 99. But the only major revision has been done over the last 4 years. And that was approved in 2011. 2012, the end of 2011, early 2012. And the biggest change to that was actually a ramping up of the social indicators in there, particularly social impact assessment. And that's probably been the biggest change that we've seen since, in the last 17 or 18 years since those first standards were written, was the need to have more importance addressed to social issues and social impact assessment, indigenous peoples in the forest. So I think we've learned and changed, but I think the other thing that's important to mention after the previous comment about change and being able to respond to change is that we work with a lot of big companies and we work with a lot of foresters, and they don't really like change. They like certainty. So the more that we try and respond to the market and try and change our standards, the more that they've got to try and change what they do every year. With 25,000 companies, if you make a small change to a standard, they have to change their whole system every year. So that doesn't work. So we're looking to actually change our systems less. We're trying to respond to the market, but we're also trying to keep things as stable as possible so that the companies that work with us have certainty about what they need to meet.
This is the benchmark, and this benchmark you have to meet, and if we keep tinkering it off and on, then meeting it could be a bit...
Yeah. You have to improve, but you can't just constantly tinker with the standards. Right. Because particularly when you get to a big scale, the impact on the market is so big that a small change here can have huge impacts along the entire supply chain. And you have to be very careful about making those changes in your policies and your standards, looking at the wider impacts on the entire system.
Right. Augustine, I wanted to check with you on this trademark system which RTRS has. How does this trademark system work? And if you could enlighten the audience on this subject, because not many would be familiar, because in palm oil it's slightly different. So that would be great.
By trademark system, you refer to the use of our brand or logo or things like that. Hopefully we will have someone using the logo or the trademark or the brand soon. But as I mentioned, this is more business to business and not a business to consumer. So finally, there won't be many products arriving to the consumer with the RTRS logo in the product, because if there is soy in the product, it will be in a very small percentage as lecithin or other product. So they won't stamp or label the product with an RTRS logo. So we have a policy. Again, we copy a little bit the RSPO, adapting to the soy chain requirements. But we don't foresee in a short term that this is going to be pretty much used in products, maybe in a business to business or in awareness in general, or in corporative communications of companies committed to the RTRS.
But this is something mandatory for certification, or is it That the certification linkage with trademark, what is the working?
Yeah, well, each certified company has signed a contract, a license agreement, and they are attached to certain rules that we fix in a document, in a policy of use of the trademark. And as with the FSCC and with other standards, you will have a license number, and if you make a corporative or a public claim, you have to put your license number so the audience or the public can check if you're really making a commitment that is valid or not. In our website, you can check the validity of that claim.
All right. Nick, you were raising an issue about smallholders. Because millions of sugarcane farmers in the world, maybe in Brazil or in India, wherever, they have a very small acreage. And these people have a linkage through cooperatives or maybe through private mills. So what is the pollution element or the obstacle for a sugarcane farmer to a mill, to a refiner, which is the main issue which is addressed to get a certification?
I was staggered to be told that there are at least 50 million sugarcane farmers in China. The majority of those sugarcane farmers are not organized in any way that we recognize on a family, village, cooperative, community, or other basis. Many of those farmers are functionally illiterate. Most of those farmers will be practicing the way they learnt from their fathers and their fathers before them. Those farmers are the sugarcane industry in one of the world's largest countries. If we're to have the kind of impact we want on sugarcane and its production, we have to find a way of reaching those farmers. And for China, read most of the other 104 countries in the world where sugarcane is grown. The varying degrees of complexity, organization, but more often than not, absence of organization for farmers is the single biggest challenge we're facing. There are some fantastic tools out there being designed by NGOs and others to educate the illiterate. There are some wonderful opportunities in terms of technological enhancements available. Just simply following our own production standard means that yields can increase considerably. But until the farmers are able to organize, to share, to cooperate, there's little chance for those farmers to see material benefit. So that's the single biggest challenge we have. Related to that is the fact that although we have quite some experience now with very large growing operations tied to mills, principally in countries like Brazil and Australia, where we've seen our first certification, we know that when we look at countries, and I'll give you the example of what happens in Central America, physically contiguous countries like Mexico and Guatemala and Honduras, Nicaragua, these countries have entirely different traditions of ownership and land management, participation. So it's almost impossible to transpose experience in one country to another. So for me, the challenge is going to be, as we figure out a way of enabling contact with smallholders, is to, and here's the heresy, to possibly have to adapt different models of enabling recognition and certification for smallholders. Because although it's tempting to say that one size fits all, if we're going to be truly responsive to the actual demands and needs of local communities, we may have to be brave and accept the fact that our standard needs to not flex, not compromise, but be matched to the actuality on the ground if we're to have that effect that we seek.